Sometimes a video game franchise needs a change. Maybe the story of the series had hit a natural stopping point, or the gameplay of the previous version just didn't mesh with today's gaming market. Or maybe the series hadn't been seen in ages and needed to come back in a big way. This is where the reboot comes in, a way for developers to switch up a long-running or well-known franchise so a new batch of people can be introduced to the series. And we're looking at the best of the best of the best today. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are the 10 best gaming reboots ever. Number 10. HITMAN 2016. Now, HITMAN as a franchise is best known for its wide open levels and fantastic variety on how best to eliminate your targets. And this is exactly what was delivered when Blood Money came out in 2006, and it immediately became a fan favorite. This was then followed up a few years later with Absolution. This was a game that only had a handful of open levels, replacing most of them with linear sections where you barely had any choices on how to proceed through them. Despite the title being solid enough, it just didn't feel truly like a Hitman game. IO Interactive decided to rectify their previous mistakes, however, by rebooting the series completely in 2016. Starting a brand new story of Agent 47 and Diana Burnwood dealing with a huge assassination conspiracy, HITMAN 2016 released huge, sprawling levels filled to the brim with NPCs, weapons, and multiple ways to eliminate your targets. With an episodic release schedule, fans of the series praised the game, and that praise caused 2 more sequels to be released. Luckily for us, 47's reboot put him right back on track. Number 9. Mortal Kombat 2011. Fighting games in general were in a pretty rough spot in the 2000s, and the best example for how much of a dire state the genre was in was the Mortal Kombat series. With games like Deadly Alliance, Deception, and Armageddon, the franchise was firmly set in a 3D arena fighter style of gameplay, filled with weird and rather rubbish characters sometimes, and a rather shallow moveset, compounded with a story that ultimately killed most of its cast without entertaining the longtime fans of the series. Mortal Kombat desperately needed a change, which is where the 2011 reboot came in. Taking the game back to its 2D fighter origins, the plot and the roster of the game was an altered version of the first 3 titles, with deep movesets, better than ever fatalities, and fantastic side content. I mean, let's face it, getting jump scared in the crypt was the best and worst thing. The reboot brought the series back to prominence, and with 2 more games after this, Mortal Kombat is looking better than ever. Number 8. Doom 2016. High-octane, hyper-violent, rip-and-tear, roaringly fun, Doom 2016 was exactly the shot of adrenaline the franchise needed. After the first 2 games that helped create and define the first-person shooter genre, and after all the million different versions of those 2 games, Doom 3 came out in 2004. Now, the game was a reboot in and of itself, and it was a horror game that had the player step into the shoes of someone other than Doomguy, making the player a bit more vulnerable than they might have been used to. It was different, but definitely successful. The developers then decided to follow this up with Doom 4, which promptly went into development hell. 12 years later, and what came out of the other side of this was Doom 2016, another reboot that recontextualized the first 2 games and put players back behind Doomguy's helmet as he glory-killed his way through this fun, action-packed shoot-'em-up. It was critically and commercially successful and reminded fans why the franchise was so bloody special. It later got a sequel with Doom Eternal, and it's likely we'll see another game sooner rather than later. Number 7. New Super Mario Bros. Now, it might be hard to imagine now, but there was a very long period of time where there were no new 2D Mario platformers. And don't get me wrong, there's been a lot of great 3D Mario games, but where were the 2D games? After the success of Super Mario 64, Nintendo put more focus on the plumber's 3D adventures and spin-offs, only having re-releases of Mario's past 2D games on the Game Boy Advance. And the original Super Mario Bros. Series was thrown to the wayside. That is, until 2006, when New Super Mario Bros. Released on the DS, a game that brought Mario back to its roots while giving him that 3D moveset. Wall jumps, triple jumps, and ground pounds were all available as Mario went through world after world to find Bowser Jr. and the kidnapped Princess Peach. The game did incredibly well, and as such got a slew of follow-ups throughout every Nintendo system afterwards. Games for the Wii, 3DS, Wii U, and Switch came with the same formula, and while fans may be getting a little tired of them, it's still definitely nice to have the classic Mario still around. Number 6. Donkey Kong Country Returns. When you really look at it, Donkey Kong as a series is a bit strange. It went from being one of the most iconic games ever in its debut to a few weird games and spin-offs with DK Jr. and his adventures with math, back to being one of the most iconic games ever with Donkey Kong Country, and back to more weird games and spin-offs with a bongo controller. Going back to that last part though, the last Donkey Kong Country game of the original trilogy came out in 1996, and afterwards the Big Ape was floating around in a kind of mediocre limbo. Rhythm games, puzzle games, cameos in Mario sports and party titles, he was all over the place. pace. There was no consistent quality. However, in 2011, a truly great DK game finally appeared, Donkey Kong Country Returns, which brought the classic platformer into the 21st century, modernizing the whole thing while holding onto the core of the series' appeal. One of the best platformers in the modern era, this and Tropical Freeze were definitely special. Number 5. Prey 2017. Some reboots are just gameplay changes or story changes, but Prey decided to hit the full reset on everything. Prey 2017 has almost nothing to do with the original game, because after the original title, Prey 2 was in the works for the longest of times, which looked to continue the first game's story. However, it had an incredibly rocky development, with the rights of the franchise eventually getting handed over to Bethesda. After they tried their hand at making it, they decided that it would be much simpler to cancel Prey 2 entirely, and instead of focusing on a sequel, they would focus on a reboot so that they could just do their own thing. And for the most part, it worked out. Prey 2017 was considered one of the best games of that year, with its completely original story and gameplay as you fought off shape-shifting aliens, and the space station that you explored was fully realized and meticulously detailed. It might not really resemble the original, but still, it is a fantastic game by itself. Number 4. Ninja Gaiden 2004. Now, I know I complain a lot about the difficulty of this game, but damn do I love it. Back in the good old days of the Nintendo Entertainment System, or the NES, Ninja Gaiden was a game where you controlled a ninja named Ryo Hayabusa and hacked and slashed your way through tough-as-nails challenges. But back in the not-so-good, but still pretty good days of the original Xbox, Ninja Gaiden was a game where you also controlled Ryu and hacked and slashed your way through tough-as-nails challenges, but in 3D. Rebooted in 2004, Ninja Gaiden was introduced to a whole new console generation. Created in a way to focus on Western audiences, the game shined with its difficulty and violent combat, which was as deep as any other character action game at the time. With the story being a prequel to the other games, it also inspired its own sequels, and several versions of this were made as it was eventually ported over to multiple platforms. This reboot introduced a new but faithful direction for the series, and we're all the better for it. Number 3. Tomb Raider 2013. Tomb Raider is one of the most iconic franchises in gaming history, and as such, Lara Croft is one of the most iconic characters in video games. Lara's original run lasted all the way from 1996 to 2008, and while the highs were revolutionary, the lows were, well, pretty dismal. As a franchise, releases were all over the place, with Lara fighting dinosaurs, dealing with mutants, chasing after Egyptian gods, being dead, investigating death cults, and more. At a certain point, there was just no way to keep the games at a consistent quality, and if Tomb Raider was going to survive, it needed a reboot. So reboot they did. Following a younger, less experienced Lara Croft as she gets stranded on an island, you see how she comes to rely on herself whilst fighting off against the violent Solari Brotherhood, and also trying to avoid gruesome deaths however she can. It was a smash hit, making the reboot a series with 2 more games to follow, and it's nice to know that this landmark series can adapt. Number 2. God of War 2018. Now, this game is a bit weird for this list because while it is definitely a reboot, it's also a sequel. However, it's so incredible that the rules definitely can be bent a little here. God of War 2018 set off to do something that many people thought was impossible: turn Kratos into a real sympathetic character. In God of War 3, Kratos was a rage monster, barely showing any other emotion during the entire story. However, by the time that he showed up in God of War 2018, he was more reserved, his anger below the surface, as he had to learn how to be a real father to his son. With the reboot changing gameplay significantly from previous titles, the third-person over-the-shoulder angle made combat feel more close and personal, whilst the double-teaming dynamic between father and son as they explored Norse mythology was utterly charming. The game is a perfect example of blending the old with the new, and it resulted in one of the best games ever made. And number 1, Fallout 3. Now, I know that I'm going to get a lot of flack from the purists out there because, let's face it, Fallout 1 and 2 are exceptionally good games, but if we're looking in terms of what makes a successful reboot, and that is critical praise and commercial sales, then you cannot deny the juggernaut that is Fallout 3. Plus, without this, we wouldn't have got the best game in the series, Fallout New Vegas, so let me just have this one. So when Bethesda hoovered up the rights to the series, they decided to change things up significantly, with the isometric view of Fallout 1 and 2 now becoming first person, and turn-based combat morphing into real-time shooting, with VATS letting you pause and nail specific shots. Placing players in an open-world map of a nuclear-ridden Washington, D.C., you were simply just trying to find your dad, who was also played by Liam Neeson of all people. And this game took off, propelling Fallout into a household name and further solidifying Bethesda as a top name in the video game industry, for a while at least, until Fallout 76. If any other developer needed a lesson on how to properly reboot a franchise, they should probably take a few notes from Fallout 3. And there we go, my friends. Those were the 10 best gaming reboots ever. I hope that you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comment section below. If you want to chat to me further, you can do so over on Twitter at RetroJ, but the O is a 0, or you can swing by my Instagram page, which is Retro40k, where I do all my painting stuff, and it'd be great to see you over there. But before I go, I just want to say one thing. Hope you're treating yourself with love and respect, my friend. Sometimes we can all do with that personal little reboot to get that positivity flowing again, so make sure you're taking a break, being kind to yourself, and just going at your own pace, alright? You're a massive ledge, and you deserve the best things in life. As always, I've been Jules. You have been awesome. Never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.